All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure there will be some others that will trickle in, but to respect the time of those that have joined on time, we'll just go ahead and jump right into the webinar today. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining. We're excited to share some information around the topic of UI UX and SharePoint and Office 365. This is, I guess, appropriate to the month of July. You know, the topic here is make your SharePoint sparkle, and really it's about enhancing the user experience and design around SharePoint and Office 365 to become an environment in which people want to work and that they become more efficient because of the design of the solutions and environment as well. So let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Jeff Priest. I'm with Crow Canyon Systems. You can see that many of those who have joined today are current customers, but there's a number that look to be new to Crow Canyon as well. So I will be the moderator here, so we'll kick this off and then also finish up at the end. So what we'll do in this presentation in terms of an agenda, we'll do a quick introduction of Crow Canyon. We'll then turn the time over to Matt Kuhn, who will go through the presentation of UI UX. And then we will also, towards the end, we'll collect questions. So we hope that this will be interactive in the sense that you post questions in the GoToMeeting control panel, and we will have a Q&A session at the end that where we'll go through each one of those questions and answer the questions you have during the post-webinar, but the questions that have popped up during the presentation. So please, if you have a question, post them, and we will make sure that we answer as many of those we can according to the time that we have within this webinar time slot. Also, Matt Kuhn, one of our good friends from Zooma, one of our strategic partners, will be presenting, and Matt Kuhn is an expert in UI, UX on SharePoint and Office 365 and has extensive design experience that he's going to share with you. Now, Crow Canyon, a little bit of background here. Crow Canyon has been around since 1999, before the existence of SharePoint, developing solutions, business solutions, and as SharePoint was launched, we adopted SharePoint as sort of the main platform in which we develop solutions for our customers. We have a number of out-of-the-box applications, as well as a custom dev and professional services group, in which we are working with clients today, doing a lot of business process, workflow, as well as UI, UX within their SharePoint and Office 365 environments. Now, if you want to learn more, we have a lot of resources on our site. We have a blog with a lot of different articles that are SharePoint-based related. There's some great articles around this same topic as well. So please take note. We'll send this deck out after the webinar, and you'll have this as well. But please take note of this link and go to our. Feel free to visit our site and go and read some of those blog articles. They're very intelligently written, and this should be informative. Now, as we, what I want to do is introduce Matt Kuhn, turn the time over to him, and then he can jump right in. I know that you guys have all come to hear more information and details about how we can improve the environments in SharePoint and Office 365. One thing to note, too, I want to say is that throughout all our experience with SharePoint development, we have spent a lot of time in this particular on this particular topic and helping our customers better leverage SharePoint. And the thing that we have heard from the community universally is that there's a real big challenge with user adoption. And a lot of that happens to do with the fact that out-of-the-box SharePoint can be a little clunky. So we worked really hard in the UI and UX component of our products, as well as the custom solutions that we build for our clients. And we can attest to the fact that those enhancements can significantly improve the overall usage of SharePoint and Office 365. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Matt Kuhn, and I'm going to go ahead and make him a presenter, and might take him a second here to get the screen up, and we'll jump right into the presentation.
All right. Well, thanks for the intro, and thanks everyone again for jumping on today. This is often a hot topic in across software development, web development these days, as well as starting to kind of creep into the SharePoint world. So I think it's good that everybody came for a little bit more information, and by no means is this an encyclopedia of UX for SharePoint. It's kind of just a 500-foot overview of what some of the things we've seen in this world, and some of the ideas we have, and the ways that we go about trying to improve that user experience in SharePoint. So already been introduced, don't need to go there again, but my background is user experience. In my company, Zooma, we work with SharePoint, we work in open source technologies. So what we try to do is we try to incorporate a lot of those best practices from stacks and software and CMSs outside of SharePoint, and just try to bring in general web best practices to SharePoint to try and improve it, just like these other systems have adopted them. A couple different topics today, or sections that we're going to go through. It's only going to be about 30 minutes. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. But we're really just going to touch on, what is UX, why do we do it, why is it important, then more specifically, what does it mean in the SharePoint world? I'm sure everyone here has adopted SharePoint or are considering adopting it, and maybe this will ease some current pain points that you might have in your current systems, or maybe ease some of those concerns that you might have if you're considering adopting SharePoint. And then we're going to jump into actually more of the technical process, and okay, now there's all this great UX, and we know how it works in SharePoint, but how do we do it? So this will give you a great overview if you wanted to get something started in your organization, kind of an outline of how to get going, applying some of these principles to SharePoint. We'll show you some pretty samples of some demo sites and everything that we've built that kind of illustrate a lot of what I'm preaching here. And then finally we'll wrap up with, UX is great, the designs look pretty, it doesn't look like SharePoint, it doesn't work like SharePoint, but really the bottom line is what's the return? Why do we want to do all this stuff to SharePoint? Why do we want to go there and mess with it? That'll kind of touch on some of the benefits of adopting some of these strategies. So the first slide, the first section here is just kind of an overview. If you look at the largest text there, that's straight from Wikipedia. It's a definition of user experience. But to me, UX has been around, I guess. The term was coined maybe about 10 years ago. And so I think we all were working in designers' user interface. It all kind of came together and saying, hey, how can we make all these software systems that we're designing easier on the user? Everyone's different. There's so much going on at that time that, someone came up with this idea, this concept of user experience. And it sounds easy. It really just says, well, you make it intuitive, well, duh. But a lot of times that's hard for engineers, developers, project owners, project managers to really understand their users instead of building things how they see it, to really kind of put ourselves behind who the actual users are, defining them, watching them work, interviewing them, surveys, really trying to understand what it is they're trying to do, and then build a product specifically for that purpose. But it's not that hard. It just takes a little planning, a little bit of thought, and then also some tough conversations sometimes with our product owners. That a lot of times, maybe it's the people that own the business or run the business that really believe that they know their customers. In most cases, that's true, but it's always good to actually go and investigate that for yourself with those customers or users. And finally, some of the kind of the deliverables or tools that we use to really understand our users are, starting here on the left, we develop these user profiles or personas. We're actually going out and we're building kind of these profiles of our different users. And then moving over towards the right there, we start to write stories, or it's sometimes called use cases. Basically, we're trying to define what people are wanting to do with the systems that we're building. So we develop a bunch of user stories for each of those personas. And then we can start to kind of push in and do things like content strategy. Where should things be on the screen, on the page, so that it's easy and it's intuitive for the user to perform that action. So just making buttons bigger, making the colors different, making certain data, outlying data that needs to stand out and really draw the user's attention. That's everything we're focusing on when we think about content strategy. And then finally, wireframes. That's probably something everybody's familiar with. That's one of the most common practices with UX is building sketches, wireframes using Azure or Balsamic or Visio, all the same, or hand drawing them is fine. But if we just jump in and start doing wireframes, we're missing a big step, which is everything that we did before there with understanding the users and writing those user stories and developing the content on the page for them. So great, UX is wonderful, everybody loves it, it's a hot topic, but really what does that mean in the SharePoint world? And here's a few items that specifically in SharePoint and other content management systems, these are the certain areas that we would look to improve upon what SharePoint does naturally out of the box. Of course, the theme and branding is a major component, putting your logo on there, making the colors the same as maybe your corporate brand. That's a pretty common one in SharePoint. Branding's been pretty popular over the years, and the platform certainly has the capabilities to go pretty far with branding. Same thing with the header, the footer, kind of the master page elements in SharePoint. Those are all pretty easy to manipulate and adapt to our needs, as well as the content and page layouts. SharePoint Designer has been around for a while. It makes it pretty easy to get in there and hack at the different page layouts and make them a little bit more intuitive. But these bottom three are sometimes left out, and they're just as important as the more UI components of SharePoint, and that is workflow and forms. Those kind of go together, but a lot of times we can tend to leave out the importance of workflow in SharePoint, and it's certainly not the most intuitive thing. If you all have ever built workflows out of the box SharePoint or using add-ons and products, sometimes workflow can be buried within the actions list and all types of alerts and everything, and if you lose the email, it's hard to find. So what we try to do is we try to take a little bit of UX, do some wireframes, mock-up forms that can display the workflow status and workflow actions and comments all on one screen so that your users don't have to go digging through all types of task lists and everything to figure out what it is they need to approve or what the status is of a certain form or document. Finally, responsive design. That's been a staple of web development for years now, and as we see increases in mobile usage, even eclipsing what people on desktops are doing. Maybe not so much in our world of SharePoint. Most of us are sitting behind a desk using SharePoint, but we're really shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't optimize our site for tablets and mobile, because a lot of people are on the go, especially with Office 365 being publicly accessible everywhere. No longer SharePoint's not buried behind a firewall or a VPN that you really can't even get to it with your mobile device. That's kind of ending, and as we move to the cloud, everything's always accessible, so why not make it a great experience on your mobile device as it is on the desktop. And the next section here is just kind of an overview of SharePoint and how it's kind of architected, and these are the different elements or layers to SharePoint that we would look to enhance with the UX knowledge that we have, looking to enhance the interface a little bit. So what we would try to do here is, starting with the very outside here, is the master page, and that's basically our global template in SharePoint. That's where most of the markup in HTML is going to be. That controls all of those outlying elements outside of the content that's on the page. And then kind of moving down, we have the ribbon that everyone's familiar with. Not a lot we can do there. That's kind of mandated and pushed down from Microsoft, so it changes as they see fit and push updates out. But coming down a little bit further down the page, of course, you have that kind of left-hand quick launch contextual navigation, if you will. Usually tucked over there on the left side, and then coming down the page, you have your global navigation elements, and then getting even further down into the page is where you have your web parts and your content. So we're looking to kind of tweak all these different layers, as we need, as needed, as we discover through UX. These are the different type of areas that we'll be focusing on when you start to kind of get in there and really mess with how SharePoint displays data. But there's a good and bad side to all this. I mean, yes, we know we need to do it. Yes, it needs to be responsive, but it's not all perfect, and it's not for everyone. So it's not always. Some of the bad ideas here were some of the cons of doing SharePoint branding and user experience and kind of getting there and doing some customization of the interfaces. A lot of times you can break your support from Microsoft. So a lot of times if something's breaking in SharePoint, the first thing Microsoft will ask you is do you have a custom master page? They'll ask you to reset it back to their out-of-the-box master page. Again, it will, all this work does cost money, so it takes additional time and additional expense to do UX, and then in turn implement those UX enhancements. If done improperly, UX and doing custom master pages and customizations to the interface in SharePoint, it can decrease performance if we don't do it correctly. if we add images and a bunch of stuff that we really don't need to perform our job to the page, yes, it's going to slow down the performance. And it can often break SharePoint if you're in the middle and you don't implement something in one of those layers. It can certainly break your SharePoint. And it can also, your site, when updates are pushed out, especially in Office 365 that we really can't control, it can not necessarily break your SharePoint site, but it can make certain visual items on the page change as Microsoft pushes out updates sometimes. But on the other side of that, there's a lot of pros. You're gonna increase user adoption, and you're going to increase usability, and people are actually going to have fun and enjoy using the products that we build on SharePoint instead of like dreading it and saying, oh, I just don't like the interface. It's not pretty. It's boring, that sort of thing. And then on the other flip side, if we use web standards and we do things correctly, we can improve performance in SharePoint more so than what the out-of-the-box, even some of the out-of-the-box master pages can do. And of course, finally, there is device compatibility. I touched on that last slide, but basically what we're doing is, we're not just limiting ourselves to the desktop. We can actually get stuff done, on our tablets and phones, and that's what's one of the most, valuable returns of this whole process. So kind of getting more into this process after we've kind of decided, we do want to start down that road. It's just like any other project. We start to plan, and we go out maybe to our marketing team, and we look for brand guidelines that we can use and extend our style guides for SharePoint. Just making sure that we have colors and button styles and everything that matches maybe our public-facing website or something else that marketing has determined or design team has determined that this is how things need to look at our organization. And then the next step is you sort of look through your site and pick out the key pages. Most sites have a home page. They have landing pages, maybe for departments, certain dashboards. Content can have special layouts. So you just try to look through your site and look at all the different key pieces of content and areas of your site so that you can sketch those out and start to wireframe those up. And another important thing is study your data. Look at your information architecture, your content types, your fields, all those different areas, your subsites, and just so you can kind of get a plan of what's the total scope here, what everything are we undertaking, how many content types are there, that sort of thing. And then the next is just to kind of dig in and put your UX hat on, start developing those personas and user stories, really going out, interviewing people within the organization, finding out what they like, what they don't like, what their pain points are, and kind of what they do day to day so that you can start to develop a profile persona. And then finally, armed with all that knowledge, you can start to put together the shape of the website or what it needs to look like through content strategy and wireframes. But this is another, another point to make here is, you can't always, there are different teams, different sizes, different organizations with different budgets and timelines. So it's not going to be the perfect, one-size-fits-all solution for everyone. But you really just have to kind of look at your team and who you have. Is it all developers? Is there anyone with that design sense, or maybe a project manager that can go out and do a lot of the persona building because they're used to interfacing with people and getting information out of them. So you kind of have to, before you take on this process, you kind of really have to consider your organization, your team, what's going to be the best fit to implement some sort of UX plan for SharePoint. So finally, after we've gone through the UX and we're starting to put together our interface, these are just some sample wireframes that we've created of a fictional organization called Terra Firma. And what we're really trying to do here is not so much design, but really just get information on the page in the general area and size of what we think it needs to be. So that's what we're trying to do here is on the left is this is just the home page with some alerts at the top, some buttons for navigation and search, and then we know we want maybe some announcements, some corporate, global type organization-wide announcements on the home page, and then everything else on the home page below kind of the fold, if you will, are access to applications, maybe external or internal built within SharePoint products that have been added onto SharePoint to improve its efficiencies, as well as to-dos or tasks, and then maybe an activity feed. This is just example content of what a hypothetical intranet may kind of just aggregate a bunch of useful knowledge so that when your user comes in, this is the page they hit. They can quickly get access to everything they need, navigate, see what they have to do with their tasks, and maybe just kind of see what's going on within the company. So this is a very common type of landing page for an intranet. And then the next screen over here is just another example of like a mega menu where you can really cram a lot onto the page without having actually there and taking a valuable space. So this next piece here is just an example of if you have a style guide, something to do before you actually jump to design would be you have your wireframes. So you have an idea of all the different components that are going to exist or need to exist in SharePoint. And now we want to start to actually get into more of the design side and start defining what type of grid system we want to use for the layout. This one here in the middle is using a 12-column grid, which is very common. It's used in the Bootstrap framework, which I'll get into in a second. But defining other things within SharePoint, style-wise, which is like something like a quick launch, how we do mobile tab buttons. There's all these different elements that we want to include in our style guide so that when we go to build out SharePoint, this is something like a contract that we hand to the developers and say, this is what everything needs to look like everywhere. And that way we keep our design really consistent. You keep all that UX and design strategy that you developed consistent throughout the numerous subsites and subsites that we can have in SharePoint. And then finally, when we have that, we have a style guide, we have our wireframes, we can kind of chunk that over to the design team. And they can start coming up with really distinct concepts are nice because it gives your stakeholders very different visual representations of the site. We usually like to do about 3 or 4. We usually do the home page and maybe one landing page, just 1 or 2 key pages there that can really sum up what's going on within the design. And then once the design has been selected, the concept's like, hey, we want to go in that direction, then take all those key pages that you wireframed up and blow out the design and apply the design to all of those key pages. And that's about it for design. So at the end of the day, you're going to be you're going to be armed with a bunch of Photoshop files, but those are great because you can get them over to the developers and they can develop the master pages, themes, templates, all that to a pixel perfect Photoshop representation. And this is the next step. So we're getting into development. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but there's tons of ways, like anything, there's tons of ways to actually develop in SharePoint. We like to use web standards. Again, I said that towards the beginning. SharePoint, Microsoft, they have their way of doing interface, and sometimes they even still use tables, which that's kind of a big no-no. We use, tableless design is pretty established now. But we like to bring in the Bootstrap framework. If you guys don't know about it, their website is getbootstrap.com. I'll make this a link before I send out the PDF. But this is a great UI framework. It's used a lot on public-facing sites and web applications. And you'd be surprised many of the SaaS or web applications that you use are Bootstrap-based. But we can certainly bring all that UI greatness into SharePoint and apply it to Microsoft's master pages and that sort of thing. Another tool we have in our arsenal now is a thing called CSS preprocessors. And there's 2 kind of popular ones right now, less or SAS. We can certainly use those in SharePoint. It takes a little bit of work, but it really extends our ability to style all those crazy elements within SharePoint that always aren't the best, it's industry standard, the way things are styled and built in SharePoint, but certainly getting better all the time. And then the next couple things there are just, we went on it a little bit earlier, but it's just basically you're building out templates, item styles. How does content look in the site? It should look the same everywhere on the site, whether we're looking at it in the home page or a roll-up page or a department landing page. We really want to try to do a consistent look and feel throughout. And so just to wrap up here on the SharePoint implementation and design, here's just some samples of how we design for SharePoint to make it not look like SharePoint, to make it look a little bit more like modern web applications that we use, maybe more in the open source or in the, like I said, in the SaaS world. This is just a typical home page. This was a design concept developed based on the wireframes we looked at earlier. So that's kind of a good transition there. We can see, big giant images, announcements, navigation, everything. And of course we'll still have, SharePoint will still have its ribbon and everything above this, which I've cut out of this mock-up. But you can see how we're rolling up. This could easily be a list of links in SharePoint. And that's a built-in web part, very easy to do. So we're basically just taking that same web part and just putting a nice interface on it with some tabs and that sort of things and icons just to make it a little bit more visually appealing and easier to find visually, as well as the tasks and the activities. Those are all out-of-the-box web parts. They're just styled to look a little bit more modern and give a little bit more visual cue to each of the, a lot of the data in those web parts. Here's an example of a department landing page. So, most organizations organized by department. This would be a place where people of this department may come to find subsites and team sites and project sites to work in, as well as other individuals in the organization would probably come here to see who's, maybe see who else they're trying to contact someone in that department or looking for HR-specific data. This would be a good place to come. And so we kind of want to surface all that here on these kind of landing pages here. This is just an example of something different we can do with navigation in SharePoint. So typically navigation in SharePoint is you have your top navigation bar. It's fairly limited how much data you can get in that. You can usually get about maybe a dozen links in there, maybe less, maybe more. But what we do here is we just have a button at the top of the page that activates kind of a slide down or drop down or modal type of menu, mega menu. And that allows us to put a lot more information in there as far as subsites, as well as maybe rolling up even some content that we may want to get in front of people on every page, because people using SharePoint are going to use that navigation and maybe want them to be aware of upcoming events within the organization. Same thing with search. Most SharePoint sites out of the box have that search bar. You click search, it takes you off to the search center or a search results page. Same concept here. We're just keeping people on the same page. We don't want them to go away from where they're working. If maybe they're on the home page, maybe they're deep within a team site. Well, they should be able to search without having to leave that area and stay within the context that they're in. So here's just search with some filters activated, and then here's search with some, again, custom styles, but out-of-the-box search results web part. So we're really not re-engineering SharePoint. We're just re-engineering a little bit of how it looks to give a little bit more information to the user. And then finally, just a couple more examples here of, this is just a simple staff alert. So if office is closing or there's just some critical information we need to get out there to staff, again, this is in the header. It's available on every page. This is a very popular mechanism to do alerts. SharePoint even has that built into the ribbon. So we're kind of just repeating that functionality there. And then this is just another representation of that app menu. So instead of maybe burying lists and workflows deep within team sites and department sites, what we do is we try to kind of aggregate that links to those different systems. We just call them apps. It could be, like I said, an external system. Could be a list with a workflow. Could be a document library. But this way, everything that's functional within our environment is summarized here in this menu. And finally, we're going to just look at the return a little bit. So, and I kind of quoted this, I coined this term. It sounds a lot better, but it sounds a lot better than it should. But so we spend all this time in SharePoint, and it's a very powerful enterprise content management system. It certainly integrates with Office. Awesome. We can drag and drop from our desktop. We can build workflows all day. We can add products to SharePoint that increase its functionality and efficiency. So it's really great from a technical standpoint. And we put all this effort in engineering towards integration and automation with SharePoint. It's the king of that. So we really should put that same amount of effort towards our users and focusing on their satisfaction and getting them to actually enjoy using the product that we're building. A lot of times we spend all that time and we're like, man, look how everything's automated. It's so easy to use. And nobody uses it. And then we failed. And all that money and all that investment and time that we put into the platform, we're not getting our return out of it. If the users don't genuinely enjoy using it, they're going to go back to using the file share or printing documents and running them halfway across the building and doing things manually because they just don't get it. They don't, we shouldn't have to train our users to use something. It should be intuitive enough that they just get it. And then a couple other return features here are, when we do UX, we're actually just kind of building a feature matrix of what are the features that we want to see in SharePoint, what are their priorities, and those priorities aren't mandated by a manager or product manager, they're mandated by the actual users. So that's another benefit of this, is we're building things that the users want instead of things that we think they want. And then kind of across the bottom there is branding, of course. If your logo's there and the colors match your corporate, your website or your corporate brand, that's going to create a more productive environment. Responsive design we touched on already, just ensuring that, hey, you know, if I'm out on the golf course or I'm out fishing, then I can certainly, I might not be able to edit a document very efficiently, but I can certainly approve a workflow, or I can go in and check a status on a workflow or that sort of thing. That's the type of functionality we want, regardless of what device we're on. And then finally, the use of Bootstrap and these other kind of web standards is going to lower our costs in maintenance, because we no longer have to go out and find people that are SharePoint experts. We can find people that are just web experts, and we can bring them onto our team, and we can utilize them, and they can help us increase the functionality within SharePoint. And so that's a key there is, you know, if you're doing things one way, SharePoint people, you know, it's kind of hard to find sometimes, and certainly not cheap. And so this is a way that we can bring in maybe other people from our team that understand web standards, bring them onto our team, help them, get them involved in our SharePoint development. Okay, and I think that's going to do it. Jeff, I'll hand the mic back over to you.
What we want to do is kind of take this time to just sort of address some of what we see in typical questions that people have when they come to us around UI, UX. I think many times someone comes to us and they have, a lot of it is the corporate look and feel. How do we apply that to whether it be a team site or whether it be an application? How do we, that's kind of a first starting point. And then from there, it's really about you know, an intuitive interface that makes it user-friendly. So as we build applications on SharePoint, and people are looking to have an intuitive interface, what does that mean? Intuitive means different things to different people. And so, you know, the goal is to sit down, leverage expertise from a designer, somebody that has, you know, exposure to multiple projects, historical projects, come and bring those ideas, but also sit down in a discovery session to understand, you know, from a user perspective, how it is that the different roles within your organization might want to use this system. Every company is different. We have today at Crow Canyon, we have over 6,000 deployments with our customers worldwide, and we found in these conversations that every organization is different. However, there's some standards and some best practice out there in design. And part of it is just how do we get there? That's what our customers want to know. And so that's where, you know, we have an opportunity to sit down and then go through that discovery phase, come back with some wireframes, and then from there understand where do we take the design that's going to match up to their sort of corporate entity. So what I would do is here's a question that came through, and let's go ahead and address this. And Matt, the question is, what does a Bootstrap SharePoint interface look like? And from a development standpoint, using Bootstrap, is there an interface? How does that? Can you describe that a bit, and how someone might leverage Bootstrap as a utility? Is there an interface?
Yeah. So Bootstrap is really, Bootstrap is more just of a collection of. It's really just a collection of CSS, content style sheets, or cascading style sheets. So it's really just ways that we add markup HTML to the page, and then it's the CSS that makes it look a certain way. And then what it does is it has a bunch of built-in components like button styles, table grids, you know, how to lay out table data, but it really makes all that stuff really consistent, and it allows us to just change a couple of variables like color, size of button, font, and then it sends that out to the whole, you know, its whole framework. So you can really customize the interface quickly instead of having to write thousands and thousands of lines of code to determine the style. You can, just by adding some classes to elements that are already in SharePoint, once you add the Bootstrap framework, you can start to apply some of those interface elements that are part of that package.
And Matt, are those Bootstrap elements, are they embedded in the design or in the master page itself? That's the second half of that question.
Oh yeah. So it's just really you're adding classes to the master page, and so you would add some elements, you know, to apply a Bootstrap design. There is a Bootstrap starter kit on Codeplex, and again, I'll add a link to that starter kit It's basically a starter master page. It's completely blank. It's got all of the Bootstrap elements already tied into to a master page. It's got page layouts with it already. So that really gets you, like, just by starting with that that Bootstrap starter master page, that gets you about 40% right out of the gate. And then you can just go in and start customizing the color and the button radius and all those like fun little design things we like to tinker with. So.
Matt, so another question I'd have for you. So say for example, someone is interested in getting started and doing some UI UX, putting some effort into improving that. How would you say that would be the best way for someone to get started there in terms of approaching that? Would would it be contacting us? Is there, obviously you mentioned Bootstrap itself, but in contacting us and getting started, does that then set them up to be able to do things on their own moving forward in the future? What would you say is the best approach for someone to actually engage in getting started with design?
Yeah, I think it's something you have to determine within your organization first. Before you call in the big guns, you have to kind of go around, ask your users, look at your SharePoint, interview some users. Hey, is there a need here? Do we need to improve our interface within SharePoint? Could our organization use a better experience? Do we have low user adoption? Are there complaints about SharePoint? Any of those are red flags, and that's a reason to engage us or start to investigate some of these methodologies yourself. And then if you want to move it forward a little bit quicker, then certainly reach out. And it, like Jeff, like you said earlier, it's all about a discovery and kind of sitting down and laying out, kind of going through the site together, looking at all the functionality and really determining and sketching out a plan of attack there.
Okay, great. Well, generally speaking, we would push out some poll questions during the, and we had plans to do that, and I think that we just kind of got in and there wasn't probably a coordination of pushing these out. What I'd like to do before we end, there's just a couple poll questions. We'll just take about 20 seconds for each one to collect some responses from you, and it's really about, for us, understanding what have you done, sort of branding itself, and then what would be a next step, and if there's an opportunity for us to help. So I'm going to push these poll questions out, and then I'll throw up one more slide with some contact information about how you might stay in touch with us through some different social channels, etc. And then we'll go ahead and let you get back to work. So let me go ahead and push out this one poll question here, give you about 20 seconds to provide a quick response, and then we'll just go ahead and send this out right now. It should show up on your screen here. Let's take a quick look at what the response was on that. And as we're looking at this poll, say, how does your organization, has your organization done any branding or user interface design work in SharePoint Office 365? So we have these different options here. Let's just go ahead and see what this result looked like. And we'll share that so you guys can see what some of your peers out there are saying. So it's always interesting to see, throughout the group, what these results are, simply because everyone's at sort of different stages. So a number of people, say a quarter of the people, we have, we use standard SharePoint Office 365 interface, which is very common. We see a lot of that out there with our customers, just kind of use a standard interface with standard list views, standard design within SharePoint for team sites. Says a few people, which is a great number here, low number here, that we've tried but didn't, but we failed. Yes, we have branded one or more sites, and then we have some custom internet solutions, or we have a custom SharePoint intranet for organizations. So this is interesting because everyone seems to sort of across the board, but this is very common out there in the SharePoint world. Tons of adoption of SharePoint, but everybody kind of uses SharePoint in a different way. And last is somebody, people still considering implementation of some branding. Now the last poll here, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and throw this back out there, is really about what a next step might be for you. So if we can maybe get some idea from you of what your time frame might be, if you have any interest in UI UX changes, where perhaps we can be a resource to you, and whether it be just initial guidelines, guidance in terms of best practices and helping you kind of point you in the right direction, and or coming to us for a project. So we'd love to hear from you and where you guys are at today. And just as you guys are voting, just as we're wrapping this up here, is we will send out a copy of this deck to you. So we'll probably send it out in form of a link where you can get access to it if you want to go back and revisit any of the slides. And then you can always feel free to reach out to us directly. I'll put up some information. I have my personal contact information up there on one slide, and that will be in the deck that you guys get access to. But also, if you want to communicate, follow us, go to our blogs. You want to send an email into sales as an inquiry to set up a meeting with anyone on the sales team. I'm the VP of Sales here at Crow Canyon, so I'm happy to speak to you directly as well. So reach out to us in whatever way that you guys feel most comfortable, and we'd love to at least spark up a conversation. All right, so let's just go ahead and we'll shut this down now. We'll close the poll, and we'll just kind of show you here what people are saying out there. There's some people out there that are just obviously they've joined here probably of interest to see what we have to say today. But then there's a pretty good group of people that are always looking at ways in which they can improve, and that again is sort of a common thing that we see, and that's kind of the point of this this webinar today. Is just to kind of open up that topic and share some different various ways in which we have what we've seen in the marketplace and what we see as best practices and where we've helped our clients in the past. And we have a ton of different projects that we've done. We could show you what we've done in the past. This was just a very high-level snapshot of what we have, but we can sit on a call and show you a bunch of different examples, talk through what we've done with our clients in the past and how they might be relative to your organization. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and we'll go to this last slide here, and I think I might have. I don't know if we're showing that same screen again here in full screen mode, but I think I went the wrong way here.
Oh, no, you good.
Okay. All right. Whoops. Sorry about this, guys. This is we'll just show this here, and this is, I guess, not in full presentation mode, but as you get this deck, we have, of course, Twitter account, LinkedIn, blog. We have a number of ways in which you can engage with us. So you can follow us. We are always presenting out new blog articles or some interesting information. Keep in touch with us. We appreciate your time today. And so now we'll go ahead and first of all, I want to thank Matt Kuhn for his time, and then we'll go ahead and end this. I want to thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. And then we hope to see you on the next webinar.